What's going on YouTube? It's Tej back again with another video, and today I'm here to talk about the Cleveland Browns in our 2021 NFL season preview series. Starting to get towards the end of the AFC. I think it's the Browns and the Steelers. That's all that's left. Then we're jumping over to the NFC. Had fun with the series. Hopefully you guys enjoyed today's video. If you do, please hit that like button. It would help me out a ton. And if you're new to the channel, want more sports content like this, please consider subscribing. And let me hear it down in the comment section. Give me your Browns takes. How many wins do you think this team garners? Who are some X factors? What are some games to watch? I'd love to have your thoughts. I read and I respond to every comment. So let's talk about the Browns down below. Without further ado, this is one of the best teams in the AFC. This team legitimately has a shot to be the number 2 seed, maybe even the number 1 seed, right? Starting with that week 1 game, which we'll talk about later on. But this is one of the best teams the AFC has to offer. 10 to 14 wins, even 10-7 feels kind of hard for me to imagine. Like 10-7 feels just as hard to picture as 15-2. So maybe it's really 11 to 14. I haven't won in 12 games, and that might be a little low because in that way too early season predictions video had them splitting with the Steelers, and as time marinates, I definitely am less sure about the Steelers being able to steal one from Cleveland, but we'll talk about that another day, probably in our next video when we talk about the Steelers. But this is obviously one of the best teams. 12 wins feels like a safe spot. Maybe they're 13, maybe they end up being 11, but this is a team that should be playing in the playoffs. So realistic goal, make it to the AFC Championship game. That might be the most lofty, realistic goal I've used so far in this series, but man, when you spend as much money they did this free agency, and you have a QB on a rookie deal, and you try to put weapons around him, you have an awesome offensive line in front of him, great running game, you really hit on the head coach and Kevin Stefanski. I don't know. If there's a team to have a realistic goal to make it to the AFC Championship game, it's Cleveland, it's Tampa Bay, it's Kansas City, it's Buffalo. Those legit contenders, and that leads right into the reach goal. This team is one of those handful of teams that I've alluded to in previous videos that have a real shot at winning the Super Bowl. So that should be the reach goal for Cleveland. Now let's talk about some X factors, some guys who will help them be able to reach that pinnacle and come away with the Lombardi. For me, Odell Beckham Jr. has to be on the field for this team to win the Super Bowl. I know they look really good without him last year, and the splits for Baker Mayfield are better without OBJ versus with. I think last year that really comes down to getting used to the Stefanski offense and settling into everyone's role. And I think if OBJ doesn't get hurt, he puts up some big numbers last year fitting into that offense. I mean, we saw Donovan Peoples-Jones be a benefactor of that play action offense and the plays that Stefanski draws up. So if it can benefit someone like Donovan Peoples-Jones as a rookie, imagine Odell Beckham Jr., right? So if he's out there, I think this offense is as tough to slow down as it gets, because that run game will just, it wears you down like no other. Like that in Tennessee, like for 4 quarters having to deal with that, I could only imagine being an NFL defensive player against one of those two teams. And then if you have somebody like OBJ, who talent-wise still top 10 receiver in the NFL, can beat just about any corner in the league, benefiting from a team that can run the hell out of the football and then go play action with it. He's just got to be out there. That's the only thing that's really slowed down OBJ. And some bad QB play, end of his time in New York, beginning of his tenure in Cleveland, I guess. Some, weird coaching situations that have transpired over the past 2 to 3 years, not last year, but before that. But, if OBJ is out there, he's going to be a guy who produces in that offense. Anthony Walker Jr., our number 2 X factor. And he's someone who I really started to look really favorably on 2 years ago for Indianapolis. Took a bit of a step backwards last year. Didn't look as good in coverage. Overall, the production grades and the stats just took a step backward for Anthony Walker Jr. This is a team that needed linebacker big time. They drafted Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, but they needed somebody to be the Mike, and that's Anthony Walker. And if Walker can be, he doesn't have to be anything special. If he can just be good, be the QB of the defense, relay the changes at the line of scrimmage, go toe-to-toe with, opposing QBs, and do enough to prevent big plays, busted coverages against that defense, he will have done his job, right? If he can be the signal caller, relay changes at the line of scrimmage, that's a really strong baseline to work with, especially with guys like Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, who are talented as all get out, have this extreme, rare skill set to play alongside you. And Anthony Walker Jr. is a good enough athlete to do some work himself. So they just needed a Mike linebacker. And I think Anthony Walker Jr. can at least be serviceable in that role, which helps this defense a ton in my eyes. And then Greg Newsome II. It's actually kind of funny. We had OBJ, Odell Beckham Jr., Anthony Walker Jr., then Greg Newsome II. Wasn't purposeful. I really contemplated Newsome or Greedy Williams, but if you take a guy in the first round, I have to think that they're planning on starting him on the outside. Additionally, I love Greedy Williams coming out of LSU, but he has just not been able to stay on the field. So I felt like because I can't count on Greedy Williams being out there to be an X factor, I decided to give the nudge to Greg Newsome II. But, either way you slice it, that number 2 cornerback spot opposite Denzel Ward is going to be huge for this team. If they don't have to be as good as Denzel Ward when he's playing really good, but if they can just slow down that second option and give this team 2 really quality corners, a great one in Ward, and then, just an above average starter on their side with those safeties, John Johnson III, Ronnie Harrison Jr., and Grant Delpit, then that secondary is looking like one of the best in football. Also, Troy Hill to play the nickel. So, obviously, the game's won and lost on the outside. Numbers have started to move in that direction where you need to have, 4 good corners. So, even if Newsome isn't necessarily the starter, he's going to play some big snaps on the outside, giving, Greedy Williams a breather, or Denzel Ward even a breather. Or maybe they kick him inside when Troy Hill needs a break. Whatever the case may be, he's going to play some big snaps for a really good football team. And if he's up to the challenge and he plays well, that secondary to go along with the money they spent, bringing in Jadeveon Clowney, signing Anthony Walker Jr., drafting Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, all the moves they made to fortify that front 7, then this defense looks legit. But, it weighs heavily on the shoulders of guys like Anthony Walker Jr. and Greg Newsome II. Some games to watch, then we'll close this video out. Week 1 against Kansas City. Is this not the most entertaining game of Week 1? Let me know what game you're most looking forward to. But, outside of the Steelers, this is the game I'm really, really looking forward to watching, because it's a battle between maybe the 2 best teams in the AFC. And if not the 2 best, 2 of the top 3, maybe 2 of the top 4, depending on how you look at the AFC as a whole. But obviously, a great rematch from last year's playoff game where, Andy Reid has, balls of steel, sending out Chad Henne on a 4th and 1 and converting on a big 4th down. If he doesn't, who knows how that game turns out. But this is the opportunity for Cleveland. They start out Week 1 in Kansas City with a road win at Arrowhead to knock off the Chiefs. That's a statement W to start the year, and that puts the world on notice, especially with Cleveland, right? We thought they were going to be really good 2 years ago, and then the whole Freddie Kitchens debacle really moved the timetable back a couple years. If they were to pull off that upset at Kansas City, that would put them on the map and just let the NFL world know, hey, we're serious this time around. We have a talent, and we're going to be able to produce with it. Week 10 against New England. Say the Ravens maybe are the team that ultimately wins the AFC North. This Browns-Patriots matchup then carries a lot of weight over, who could potentially make the wild card or who has higher seedings. Maybe they both make the wild card, but who's the 5, who's the 6, or who's the 6, who's the 7, whatever the case may be. This just becomes a matchup of, seeding and then maybe even getting the playoff versus not. It could be that close in the AFC. But also, it'd be a signal change. Again, we talk about putting the world on shock if they beat the Chiefs. The Patriots, last year was obviously down, but over the last 2 decades, they've been the most accomplished team in football, and then the Browns have been the laughingstock over the last, maybe decade. They had some good years with Derek Anderson and company before that. But this is, a team that's been the comedic relief of the NFL, while the Patriots have been, the shining trophy on the shelf. If the Browns come away with a win in Foxborough, all 3 of these games on the road, big things for me. If they were to beat New England at New England, that would be a huge statement win for Cleveland. And the last one we'll talk about, Week 16 against Green Bay. Need I say more? With Aaron Rodgers staying in there, they're probably the 2nd best team in the NFC. Some people see Cleveland as the 2nd best team in the AFC. So these are 2 teams that are in an equal spot because of that. They're not necessarily the number 1 contender everyone's looking at. They're not Kansas City. They're not Tampa Bay. You're not penciling them into the Super Bowl for a rematch like last year. But they're knocking on the door of potentially getting there. So obviously that creates a lot of intrigue, and just naturally, these are 2 very talented teams. Week 16, Cleveland goes on a road, and again, if they win this game, this is a huge statement victory. You knock off the Packers in Lambeau that late in the year, in the weather. It signifies that the Browns are serious this year. So all 3 of these wins kind of have that common theme. Those are statement games. If they come away with wins, it means a lot to their resume, but also just how we look at this Cleveland team. But that's going to do it for my 2021 Cleveland Browns season preview. Tell me what you think about the Browns down in the comment section. How many wins do you think they get? Who are some X factors? What are some games you're looking forward to watching? Even the games I picked out. Tell me how you think they break out, as we are very far away from them being played. It's fun to speculate. But hopefully you all enjoyed today's video. If you did, please hit that like button. It would help me out a ton. And if you're new to the channel, want more sports content like this, please consider subscribing. That's going to do it for this one. Hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. And until next time, my name is Tej, and I'm signing off.